I left for work that morning with a travel mug in one hand and my keys in the other, and by the time I got home, half my property line had vanished. My fence was gone. Not leaning, not broken, not damaged by some storm or fallen tree. Just gone like somebody had decided they had every right in the world to erase something I paid for and pretend it had never been there. And standing 20 feet away from where that fence used to be was my new neighbor, calm as could be, waving a contractor toward my yard like he owned both sides of the line. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be some awkward neighborhood misunderstanding. This was going to turn into a war. I live in a quiet part of Franklin Ridge, Tennessee, one of those neighborhoods built in the late 90s where every house looks a little different, but everybody still notices if someone leaves a trash can out too long. My place sits on a corner lot. Not huge, nothing fancy, but clean and simple. I've lived there close to 8 years. I keep the yard trimmed, the flower beds neat, and I like things where they belong. My fence ran along the east side of the yard, 6 feet tall, cedar privacy panels, sealed every spring. I had it installed 4 years after moving in, and I paid extra for the survey because I didn't want even 1 inch of confusion later. Best money I ever spent. The house next door had belonged to an older couple named Harold and June for years. Sweet people. Quiet. Then Harold passed. June moved closer to family, and a few months later the place sold. That's when Carter Bell showed up. Carter was probably early 40s, maybe a little younger, the kind of guy who walked fast even when he had nowhere to be. Nice truck, wraparound sunglasses, expensive boots, always on the phone with somebody. First time we met, he came over carrying blueprints and introduced himself like we were about to become business partners. Planning to wake this place up a little, he told me. I laughed and said, "Good luck with that." He smiled back, but it wasn't really friendly. More like competitive. Over the next 2 weeks I watched dumpsters arrive, siding pallets stacked in the driveway, contractors coming and going. Nail guns, compressors, trucks backing up all day. It was a lot, but hey, his property, his money. Then one evening while I was checking the mail, he walked over and looked down the side yard. He pointed at my fence. "Ever think about moving that?" I said, "No." He gave a half grin. "Would open things up." "For who?" He chuckled like I was joking. Then he walked away. I didn't think much about it at the time. Probably should have. The next Monday I left for work a little before 7. Fence looked exactly like it always did. Sun barely up. Sprinklers running. Totally normal. By 6:15 that evening I pulled into my driveway and just sat there with the engine running. Because the entire east side looked wrong. My fence panels were stacked near the back maple tree like scrap lumber. Posts ripped clean out and tossed aside. The ground churned up. Gravel spread almost to my grass. And there was a skid steer parked halfway into what used to be the boundary line. I got out and just stared for a second. That weird feeling hit first, the one where your brain doesn't catch up right away. Then anger. Then adrenaline. Carter was standing in his driveway talking to one of the contractors. I walked straight over. "What happened to my fence?" He turned like I'd interrupted something. "Oh, that. It was blocking access." I stared at him. "My fence was blocking access to your driveway." He shrugged. "We needed the extra room. You tore it down. Temporarily." "No. You ripped posts out of the ground." One contractor suddenly found his boots very interesting. Carter folded his arms. It was sitting over the line anyway. I actually laughed because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No, it wasn't. My guy measured. I had it surveyed. He shrugged again. That shrug, man, I still remember it. Like I was inconveniencing him by caring about my own property. Then he looked at the pile of panels and said, "If it's really yours, put it back." Just like that. Like he'd done me some kind of favor. I said nothing. Because if I opened my mouth right then, I was going to say something I'd regret. I walked back inside, dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, and pulled out every closing document I had. Survey paperwork. Permit. Fence invoice. I spread it all across the dining table. And there it was. Bright red survey line. Fence installed 6 inches inside my property boundary. Exactly where it was supposed to be. Not on the line. Not close. Definitely not his. I scanned it and emailed him right then. Simple message. Attached survey. Fence is entirely on my property. Expecting immediate response. Nothing. No reply. No apology. No acknowledgement. The next morning I left 10 minutes early and looked over before heading to work. That's when I saw wooden concrete forms laid out where my fence had been. Fresh gravel packed down. Markers in the ground. And even from the street, I could tell one thing. He wasn't widening inside his lot. He was building into mine. That's when the whole thing stopped feeling personal and started feeling strategic. Because Carter didn't lose his temper. He didn't make a mistake. He made a calculation. He figured if he moved fast enough, poured concrete before I reacted, then everything would become harder to undo. And standing there in dress shoes on damp morning grass, looking at those forms crossing over land I'd paid taxes on for 8 years, I remember thinking something very simple. Okay, you want speed. Let's see how fast the city moves. Okay, you want speed. Let's see how fast the city moves. I drove straight to work, but barely got anything done that morning. I answered emails, sat through one meeting, nodded like I was paying attention, and the entire time my brain kept replaying that pile of fence panels in the yard and Carter standing there acting like he was doing me a favor. By lunch I'd had enough. I got in my truck, drove downtown to the Franklin Ridge Municipal Building, and walked into the permit office carrying my survey rolled under one arm. The woman at the front desk was named Denise. Mid-60s, silver glasses, looked like she'd been handling contractors and angry homeowners since before the internet existed. She asked what she could help with. I said, my neighbor tore down my fence yesterday, and I'd really like to know whether the city approved what he's doing. She gave me a look over the top of her glasses. Address. I gave it. She typed for a few seconds. Then she clicked something, leaned toward the screen, and printed out a site plan. She slid it across the desk. Driveway expansion permit approved last week. I looked it over. 12 feet wide. Required setback from property line. 0 encroachment. Clear as day. I looked back up. Can I ask a dumb question? Denise smiled. Those are my favorite kind. If somebody pours 14 feet instead of 12, she adjusted her glasses. That would become a very expensive conversation. I folded the paper and thanked her. On the drive back, I picked up a tape measure. When I got home, Carter's crew had already packed down more gravel. 2 workers were checking form boards. I stayed on my side, measured from the survey marker. Then again. Then one more time. 14 feet. Exactly. 2 feet beyond approval. And a full foot over my property line. One of the contractors saw me measuring. He looked nervous. I asked him calmly, you guys have the approved plans? He looked toward Carter's house. Then said, you'd need to ask him. That answer told me enough. I filed a formal site inspection request before dinner. Didn't threaten. Didn't yell. Just submitted survey documents, permit copy, measurements, photos. Then I waited. Carter must have gotten wind of it because the next morning he caught me while I was pulling out of the driveway. He stepped toward my truck. You went downtown? I kept my hand on the wheel. I did. He gave a tight smile. This doesn't need to become a thing. I looked right at him. You tore down my fence. You can put it back. No. You can. He leaned closer. You really want to drag inspectors out here over a few inches? I said, good thing it's more than a few. Then I drove off. That afternoon around 3 my phone buzzed. City inspection confirmed. Scheduled next day. Carter's crew kept working until sunset, which honestly told me he still believed he could outrun the process. The next afternoon, I left work early. Inspector arrived at 3:30. Guy named Victor Ramirez. Quiet. Clipboard. Laser measure. Didn't waste words. I showed him survey pins. Permit. Photos. Victor nodded. Then measured. Again. Then one more time. Carter came out of his garage halfway through. Afternoon. Victor barely looked up. Need approved site plan. Carter handed him a folder. Victor compared paperwork. Then looked at the forms. Then measured again. He turned. Approved width is 12. Carter nodded. These are minor field adjustments. Victor stared at him and said in the calmest voice imaginable, concrete does not count as minor. That might have been my favorite sentence I've ever heard. Carter tried again. It's temporary. Victor pointed to the staked forms. No, temporary is chalk. This is construction. Then he pulled a bright orange notice from his clipboard pouch and stapled it right to Carter's garage trim. Stop work order. Visible from the street. One contractor muttered under his breath. Another immediately started loading equipment. By sunset, every machine was gone. No pour. No crew. No progress. Just orange paper flapping in the breeze. And Carter standing in his driveway with both hands on his hips staring at it like maybe the sign would disappear if he looked long enough. I'll be honest. That was satisfying. Real satisfying. But the weird part? I still wasn't angry anymore. Once the city stepped in, it stopped feeling emotional. It became math, measurements, paperwork, facts. And facts don't care who talks louder. That evening around 7, there was a knock at my door. I opened it. Carter stood there without sunglasses for the first time. He suddenly looked tired, like a guy doing calculations in his head and not liking the answer. He cleared his throat. "Can we talk?" I stepped onto the porch. He looked toward the orange stop work notice. "Contractor got aggressive." I said nothing. He rubbed the back of his neck. "We may have gotten ahead of ourselves." "You think?" "I'm trying to fix this. You can start with my fence." He nodded slowly. "Look, tearing down and rebuilding everything's gonna cost money." I almost laughed. "Yes. I was thinking maybe we split." "No," he blinked. I kept my voice calm. "Same fence. Same placement. Your expense." He looked annoyed. I kept going. "And the driveway gets poured exactly per permit." He exhaled. "That's a lot. You removed my property without permission and built into land that isn't yours." He didn't answer. I added one sentence. "And I still haven't used the words trespassing or property damage." That landed. You could actually see it. His jaw tightened. Then he nodded. "Okay," I said, "in writing." He hesitated, then said, "Fine." The next morning I got an email. Simple. Contractor would remove overage. Driveway reset to approved width. Fence restored matching original design entirely at his expense. I printed it. Because paper matters. Over the next week his project basically reversed itself. Extra gravel removed. Forms torn apart. Contractors suddenly very careful. Victor came back and remeasured everything. Approved 12 feet exactly. Then came fence day. A new crew arrived early. Cedar panels stacked neatly. Fresh posts. Concrete bags. I took the day off work. Not because I didn't trust them. Okay, mostly because I didn't trust them. I stood outside with coffee in one hand and survey papers in the other while the first post hole got marked. One worker asked politely, "Mind confirming this location?" I smiled. "Happy to." He measured 6 inches inside the line. "Exactly right." Carter walked outside once, saw me standing there with the survey, and turned around without saying a word. By noon the first section was up. By evening the whole fence line stood there again. Straight. Solid. Better than before. And when the sun dropped low enough to throw shadows across the yard, I ran my hand across one of the cedar boards and felt this strange calm hit me. Because it was never really about wood, or gravel, or a driveway. It was about someone looking at what belonged to you and deciding their plans mattered more. And that kind of thing, if you let it slide once, tends to grow. What I didn't know yet was that Carter's renovation wasn't finished. Not even close. And about 4 weeks later, standing outside on a Saturday morning with a lawn mower humming in the background, I noticed something near the front porch that made me stop cold. And about 4 weeks later, standing outside on a Saturday morning with the mower running and the smell of fresh-cut grass hanging in the air, I noticed something near Carter's front porch that made me stop cold. He'd started the porch expansion. Framing was already up. New support beams, fresh lumber, workers moving in and out. Nothing unusual there. Except one corner. The front right corner looked close. Too close. Now, let me be fair here. I didn't grab the survey right away. I didn't sprint inside like some neighborhood hall monitor. I actually stood there for a minute trying to talk myself out of it. Maybe the angle's weird. Maybe I'm seeing it wrong. Maybe I'm officially becoming that guy. And honestly, I laughed a little. Because a month earlier I would have ignored it. But after what happened with the fence, after watching a man stare directly at a property line and convince himself it was optional, yeah, now I paid attention. I shut off the mower, walked to the garage, pulled the survey tube off the shelf, and took a look. Then I walked back outside, measured from the sidewalk corner, then the utility marker, then the side reference point. And there it was. The porch itself was still on his property. Barely. But one decorative brick column base at the corner extended right into the required city setback. Not onto my land, but definitely outside code. By maybe 8 inches. Which doesn't sound like much. Until you remember that 8 inches had already cost him once. I stood there holding the tape measure and just stared. Part of me thought, let it go. He fixed the fence. Paid for it. Stayed quiet ever since. Maybe everybody learned something. Then Carter walked out front. Saw me measuring. And gave me this look. That half smile again. The same one from day one. Like he was daring me. Like he thought we both remembered what happened, but he still hadn't fully accepted why it happened. He leaned on the porch railing. Everything okay over there? I smiled. Just mowing. He nodded. Looks like measuring. Sometimes. He smirked. Relax. It's all permitted. And there it was. That tone. Not aggressive. Not loud. Just that same old confidence. Like rules only counted when they helped him. I rolled up the tape measure. Said, good to know. Then walked back inside. I sat at the kitchen table with coffee and looked out the window. And I'll be honest. I wrestled with it. Because there's a line between protecting what's yours and becoming obsessed. And I didn't want to be bitter. Didn't want to become the neighbor constantly peeking over hedges looking for violations. But I kept thinking about one thing. If he hadn't torn out my fence, if he hadn't looked me dead in the face and acted like I should be grateful, I never would have checked. He created this version of our relationship. Not me. So Monday morning I called the permit office. Denise answered. I said, hey, weird question. She laughed. Back for another expensive conversation? Possibly. I gave her the address. She pulled up the file. Then got quiet. Long enough I knew something was there. Finally she said, interesting. That word again. I asked, what kind of interesting? Porch approved at original footprint dimensions. I looked out the window. Then why does the permit note say decorative columns? Because columns were approved inside the footprint. I smiled to myself. Got it. Site review was scheduled 2 days later. Victor came back. Same clipboard. Same laser. Same column. Measured the corner. Checked plans. Measured again. Carter came outside halfway through and looked genuinely irritated. Seriously? Victor didn't look up. Permit compliance review. It's decorative brick. Victor straightened up. Decorative still occupies space. I almost felt bad for Carter. Almost. He rubbed both hands through his hair. How far? Victor checked. 7 3/4 inches. Carter laughed like it was ridiculous. Victor stayed completely flat. City code doesn't round down. That might have been the second greatest sentence I'd heard all year. No stop work order this time. Just correction notice. Brick base had to come out and be reset. Small issue. Not catastrophic. But enough to delay inspections. Enough to push subcontractors. Enough to reschedule deliveries. Enough to turn his carefully planned renovation calendar into a mess. And that was the part that felt strangely familiar. Because tearing down my fence hadn't cost him immediately. It cost him later. In delays. In labor. In paperwork. In momentum. A week after that he caught me near the mailbox. No anger. No sarcasm. Just tired. He stood there with an envelope in one hand. Said, you happy? I looked at him. And for a second I actually saw the real guy underneath all the swagger. A guy used to pushing forward and getting his way because most people don't want conflict. I answered honestly. No, that surprised him. I continued. I would have been happy if none of this ever happened. He looked down, then nodded once. I shouldn't have touched your fence. No. I thought if I moved fast enough it'd be easier to apologize later. I gave a dry laugh. That strategy didn't work out great. He actually smiled. Small. Tired. No, it didn't. Then he handed me the envelope. Inside was a gift card to a local hardware store and a handwritten note. Nothing dramatic. Just, sorry for crossing the line. Literally and otherwise. I stood there reading it. Then looked up. He said, my wife made me write that. I laughed. For real. Smart woman. Very. And for the first time since he moved in, we actually had a normal conversation. Nothing deep. Weather. Contractors. How expensive lumber had gotten. Simple stuff. A month later the porch was finished. Looked good too. Driveway poured exactly 12 feet. Fence standing straight between us. And something funny happened after all that. We got better at being neighbors. Not friends. Not barbecue on the weekend buddies. But respectful. Measured. Careful. Like two people who both finally understood where the lines actually were. Every once in a while I still think about that first evening. Pulling into the driveway and seeing empty space where my fence used to stand. How fast anger can rise. How quickly somebody can convince themselves your boundaries are flexible if it benefits them. And how satisfying it feels when facts quietly put everything back where it belongs. The fence is still there today. Cedar's weathered a little. Looks even better now. And every spring when I reseal it, Carter usually gives me away from across the driveway. He doesn't say much. He doesn't need to. Because we both remember. And maybe that's the real thing people don't talk about with neighborhood disputes. Sometimes the property line isn't what matters most. Sometimes it's whether the people living on either side believe the line deserves respect. And I'm curious what you think. If you came home and found your fence torn out by a neighbor trying to move faster than the rules, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have called the city? Would you have let it go? Or would you have pushed even harder? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you've ever had a neighbor test your patience, and subscribe for more real stories where lines get crossed and sometimes put back stronger than before.